What is the difference between a protagonist and an antagonist? Well, the protagonist is usually the hero or heroine, and the antagonist is the villain. Now, that's just the simple definition. So, like, if you watch a movie or read a book, the hero, the guy or girl who saves the day, that's the protagonist, and then the villain that tries to attack the hero or make things difficult or just do evil things, that's the antagonist. However, it can get more complicated than that. Just to give you an example, a quick example of that, Die Hard from 1986. Bruce Willis plays John McClane, the hero. Alan Rickman plays Hans Gruber, who's the antagonist. And, it's a simple action scenario, Bruce Willis, his character has to save the day. Alan Rickman's the villain that, kills people and tries to steal money. Simple action setup. However, there's other movies where it might not be clear who's the protagonist, or I should say who's the antagonist. The protagonist, you almost always know who that is. And they don't necessarily have to be heroes, though. Like, I'll just think of a random example. As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson. It was a 1997 movie. Jack Nicholson, Helen Hunt, Greg Kinnear. It was a romantic comedy movie, I guess, or a comedy drama, whatever you want to call it. But it wasn't an action film or any kind of like evil film like that. There's no villains or heroes in that kind of movie. It's a movie basically about what could happen in real life. Not to say that there's no villains in real life, you know what I mean? A comedy drama, it's like a romantic flick / comedy, so it's not a type of film that has action or anything like that. But my point is, a film like that doesn't have heroes or villains. It has protagonists, but it doesn't really have antagonists. Because for all those of you who know the movie, I mean, you could say Jack Nicholson's character, forget his character's name in the movie, Melvin, I think his name's Melvin in the movie. The Melvin character is the protagonist, even though he's not like a really likable guy. He's always like pissing people off. He's still the protagonist because the whole film centers around him, and all the actions and the whole sequence of events that happen in the story happen to this character. So he's the protagonist. There's no really real antagonist because all the characters around him are good. No one's trying to make his life, well, I guess they are making his life difficult inadvertently, but you wouldn't really call them antagonists. They're really all protagonists. Helen Hunt, Greg Kinnear, Jack Nicholson, all their characters are the protagonists, more or less. So there would be no defined antagonist. Yeah, I mean that's the best way I could describe that. And another example where it can get weird, the 1986 film remake of The Fly with Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. That's really complex because the protagonist is obviously, you would think, Jeff Goldblum, because the whole movie centers around him and his work as a scientist who invents these telepods that transport you from one pod to the other, and they end up placing DNA and genes together, so it creates like monstrous things, like a fly and a person merge together and becomes the human fly, Brundle fly. That's what it was. So yeah, and when he becomes the fly, he's kind of evil. He pukes on people's hands and then they burn off, and he arm wrestles a guy and it like breaks his wrist bone. That kind of thing. So he starts out good, but then he becomes bad. So does that make him a protagonist throughout the whole film, or does he become an antagonist at the end? He starts out as a protagonist, and then he becomes an antagonist. Well, if you follow the hero and villain definitions, then I guess that would be true. However, he's not really an antagonist, because the real definition of a protagonist is just the character in which the story centers around that character. The events, everything that happens to that character. So he's a protagonist, no matter if he does bad things or good things. So who would the antagonist be in The Fly? I think, now some people might disagree, but I think it's Stathis Barnes, the character Stathis Barnes. I forget who that actor is who plays him. You remember he's the guy with the beard and the mustache who was always trying to hit on Gina Davis's character. That character would be the antagonist, in my opinion, because he's always the guy trying to get Brundle's girl, and he's also the guy that tries to kill Brundle with his rifle. I think or a shotgun. I forget what he was using. But remember near the end, he goes to Brundle's apartment, and he has the gun, and he's looking to kill the Fly. And then that's when Jeff Goldblum plops down from the window and pukes on his hand. And it melts. So, in essence, Jeff Goldblum is still the protagonist, because he's actually basically defending himself from the guy who's in his apartment trying to kill him. So, but I guess if you look at it, Stathis Barnes is the hero because he's just trying to save Gina Davis from the Fly. So it's your own perception. But I guess the official definition would be Jeff Goldblum, protagonist; Stathis Barnes, the antagonist. Even though the protagonist becomes sort of the villain, but not really. Well, you kind of feel sorry for him at the end, so that's why he's not the villain. It's just the experiment just drove him into madness and turned him into a vicious human fly. It can happen to anybody, right? Anyway, this video's going on too long now. That's just how I would explain protagonist and antagonist. I'm sure you all know. Basically, just think hero, protagonist, villain, antagonist, and a story will always have a protagonist, but not necessarily an antagonist. Like I said, As Good as It Gets doesn't really have an antagonist, so there's always a protagonist. No matter what they do or what good or bad things, there's a protagonist every time. It's the character that the story centers around, and the character that we see go through these experiences or have things happen to them. That's the protagonist. Okay, I'm gonna go to sleep now. Subscribe. We just hit 1,000 subscribers, more or less. Some fall down, some come back, but it's more or less around 1,000 subscribers. So thanks, guys, for subscribing. Let's get it to 2,000 subscribers by next week. No, I'm just kidding. By next month would be nice. Okay. Bye.